Welcome to Philippine Stories Deep Dive channel.
Oh, yeah.
Today, we're going to be diving deep into the upcoming election in the Philippines.
Okay.
Specifically, how the Commission on Elections, or Comelec, is gearing up to combat vote buying.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's an interesting time for sure.
Vote buying has been such a long-standing issue there, and it seems like Comelec is taking a much more aggressive and multifaceted approach this time around.
I think that's right.
Yeah, from what I've been reading, they're not just focusing on catching people in the act anymore.
Yeah.
They're really trying to change the entire landscape and empower voters to resist these tactics.
Right.
One of the things that caught my eye was this Kontra Bigay 2.0 initiative.
Oh, yeah, that's significant.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's a significant development.
Yeah.
It's essentially the evolution of their Kontra Bigay committee,
Okay.
which used to be a task force, but is now a permanent fixture.
So they're not.
This means they're not just reacting to vote buying anymore. Right.
They have a dedicated team in place year-round to investigate, build cases, and work towards prevention.
That's a big shift, right?
Yeah.
It suggests a real commitment to tackling this problem in a sustained way.
It does.
But what does it mean in terms of actual power? What can this committee actually do?
Well, for one, they have the authority to directly supervise all anti-vote buying operations, which allows for much more coordinated and effective investigations. But perhaps even more importantly, they can now initiate the filing of election offense and disqualification cases.
Wow.
And this isn't just limited to candidates. They can go after government employees and even private individuals involved in vote buying.
So they're casting a wider net, making it clear that anyone involved in these schemes could face serious consequences.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this ability to pursue cases even after an election is over is crucial.
Yeah.
These investigations often take time, and this ensures that they can continue to build a case even after the immediate election frenzy has died down.
Wow.
It adds a layer of accountability that hasn't really been there before.
It seems they're really serious about creating a level playing field.
It seems so.
And making sure that the election results actually reflect the will of the people.
That seems to be the goal.
And it's not just about legal action.
Right.
They're also taking steps to directly limit opportunities for vote buying.
Yeah.
One example is the new provision in Comelec Resolution number OLE, Live 104,
Okay.
which completely bans the distribution of government aid, what Filipinos call ayuda,
Right.
10 days before and on election day.
Interesting.
So no more last-minute giveaways of goods or services to try and sway voters.
Right. The only exceptions are medical and burial assistance.
Okay.
It's a direct attempt to prevent incumbents from using their access to resources for electoral gain.
That makes sense. But I'm wondering how they'll actually enforce that. I mean, how do you prove someone is giving out aid with the intention of buying votes?
That's where this concept of presumption comes in.
Okay.
If an incumbent official or even their relatives distribute any type of assistance during that prohibited period, it will automatically be presumed that they're engaging in vote buying or abuse of state resources.
So the burden of proof shifts to the accused, and they have to prove they weren't trying to influence voters.
Exactly. It's a bold move.
Yeah.
And one that could definitely deter some of these activities. But of course, it also raises questions about potential misuse and how they'll ensure fairness in the application of this rule. Something to think about for sure.
It sounds like there's a lot at stake here,
Yeah.
not just for the candidates, but for the integrity of the entire electoral process.
Absolutely. And the Comelec seems to be recognizing that this fight can't just be about enforcement. They're also increasingly emphasizing the power of citizens to resist vote buying.
Yeah, I was reading about how Comelec Chair George Garcia has been really vocal about that. He's basically saying that voters have the power to stop vote buying in its tracks.
He's not wrong. If no one is willing to sell their vote, the entire system falls apart.
Right.
It's a simple concept, but incredibly powerful when you think about it.
It's that whole idea of taking back your power, right? Refusing to be manipulated, especially when it comes to something as fundamental as your right to vote.
Right, and it seems Garcia is really trying to appeal to people's sense of dignity and self-worth.
Yeah.
He's encouraging Filipinos to see vote-buying offers as insults, as attempts to take advantage of them. And I think that's a really interesting angle.
It is. It makes you wonder, how do Filipinos view vote buying? Is it seen as a normal part of the process, or is there growing resentment? We'll have to explore that further.
Yes, definitely. And I think it's important to also consider the other side of this equation. What about the people who are actually selling their votes? What are their motivations? What are the circumstances that lead them to make that choice? These are complex questions that deserve further exploration.
I agree. We've got a lot more to unpack here. But for now, we'll leave you with that thought. How do Filipinos view vote buying? We'll be back soon to delve deeper into this fascinating and complex issue.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these efforts to combat vote buying intersect with the broader social and economic realities in the Philippines.
Absolutely. We were just starting to touch on the motivations of those who sell their votes. And
Right.
it's easy to just condemn the act itself.
Yeah.
But I think it's crucial to understand the context in which these decisions are made.
Yeah.
You know?
Right, and that context often involves poverty, lack of opportunity,
Yeah.
and a sense of being marginalized from the political process.
Hmm.
For some, selling their vote might feel like the only way to have their voice heard,
Yeah.
even if it's in a distorted way.
It's a sad reality,
Yeah,
but one we can't ignore if we want to truly address this issue.
exactly. And that's why it's so important to look beyond just punishing vote sellers and focus on creating a society where people feel empowered to participate in the democratic process without resorting to such desperate measures.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But even if we acknowledge those systemic issues, there's still the question of how to actually prevent vote buying from happening.
Well, one of the key strategies, as we've discussed, is empowering citizens to resist these tactics.
Right. We touched on that earlier. But what are some other ways citizens can get involved?
Well, one powerful tool is reporting any instances of vote buying or other election offenses to the authorities.
Okay.
The Comelec has set up hotlines and online platforms where people can submit reports anonymously,
Okay.
which is crucial for ensuring people feel safe speaking out.
That's great. It removes that fear of retribution that might prevent some people from coming forward.
Exactly. And the more reports they receive, the more evidence they have to investigate and potentially prosecute these cases.
Right.
It creates a sense of collective responsibility and strengthens the idea that these practices won't be tolerated.
It's about sending a message, right, that Filipinos are demanding clean and fair elections. But realistically, how much impact can individual citizens have? I mean, it's a systemic problem with deep roots.
You're right, it is a complex issue, but I think individual actions can have a ripple effect. When people see their neighbors, friends, and family members refusing to participate in vote buying, it can shift the social norms and create a sense that this is no longer acceptable behavior.
It's about changing the culture from the ground up.
Precisely, and that's where things like citizens' arrest come into play.
That's right. We briefly discussed that earlier. But I'm still a bit unclear on how that works in practice. Can any citizen simply arrest someone they suspect of vote buying?
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Okay.
While the Supreme Court has upheld the right of citizens to make arrests in certain circumstances, the Comelec has been cautious about actively encouraging it
Yeah.
due to the potential dangers involved.
I can imagine things could escalate quickly, especially in the heat of an election.
Exactly. So while it's technically an option, they're emphasizing other forms of citizen action,
Right.
like reporting offenses and refusing to sell their votes.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But even if someone does want to report an offense, how do they actually know what to look for? What constitutes evidence of vote buying?
Well, Comelec Resolution NOM 111104 outlines some specific scenarios that can be used as evidence. For example, if a candidate's relatives or supporters are caught offering money or valuables to voters in multiple precincts, that's a clear red flag.
So it's about looking for patterns of behavior, not just isolated incidents.
Right. And it's not just about cash handouts either. Distributing goods and services like groceries, medicine, or even construction materials in exchange for votes is also considered vote buying.
And what about that HUCO system we talked about, where people are transported to specific locations to receive incentives for voting a certain way?
Yes, that's another common tactic used in vote buying schemes.
Right.
It's particularly concerning because it often targets vulnerable communities, people who might be more easily swayed by offers of immediate assistance.
It's taking advantage of people in need, which is just wrong. But I'm curious, are there any specific provisions in this resolution that address the HUC system? How are they planning to combat that?
That's a good question. And one we'll delve into further after a quick break. Stay tuned, because this deep dive into the fight against vote buying in the Philippines is just getting started.
Welcome back to Philippine Stories Deep Dive channel. We've been exploring the many ways that vote buying undermines democracy in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And before we left off, we were talking about the HUCO system and how Comelec is trying to stop it.
Right. It's a challenge for sure. The system is especially effective because it often preys on people's immediate needs, offering them transportation, food, or other forms of assistance in exchange for their vote.
Right.
It creates a sense of obligation and can make people feel pressured to vote in a certain way, even if it goes against their conscience.
It's a manipulative tactic that really exploits people's vulnerabilities.
Right.
But going back to Comelec Resolution number 11104, are there any specific measures aimed at disrupting this Hakote system?
Absolutely. One provision that directly addresses this is the ban on transporting large sums of cash,
Right.
exceeding P500,000, along with campaign paraphernalia in the days leading up to the election.
So they're trying to cut off the flow of money that fuels these operations.
Exactly. By limiting the ability to transport large amounts of cash,
Right.
especially when accompanied by campaign materials,
Yeah.
they're making it harder to organize and execute these large-scale vote-buying schemes.
It makes sense. If you can't move the money, you can't pay the people.
Precisely. And it's not just about disrupting the logistics. It also sends a strong signal that the Comelec is serious about cracking down on these activities. It creates a deterrent effect,
Right.
making people think twice before engaging in this type of behavior.
It's all about changing the culture, right? Making vote buying less acceptable, less normalized.
Absolutely. And to really understand the impact of these measures, it's helpful to look at some real-life cases of vote buying and how they've been addressed. One example that stands out is the 2019 midterm elections in Lanao del Sur.
Okay.
A video went viral showing massive crowds of people openly being handed envelopes allegedly filled with money in exchange for voting for specific candidates.
It sounds incredibly brazen. Did anything actually come of that?
Yes, it sparked outrage across the country and became key evidence in a subsequent investigation. Charges were filed against several individuals involved, demonstrating that these actions can have consequences.
It shows that even in cases where vote buying seems to be out in the open,
Right.
there can be accountability.
Right. And this case highlights the power of technology in exposing and combating these practices. With more people having access to smartphones and social media, it becomes harder to hide these activities.
It's like citizen journalism playing a role in safeguarding democracy.
Exactly. And it's not just about catching people red-handed. It's also about raising awareness and putting pressure on authorities to take action.
Speaking of taking action, you mentioned earlier that 253 barangay officials were prevented from taking office after the 2023 elections due to evidence of vote buying. That's a significant number.
It is. And it shows that the Comelec is willing to use its authority to enforce these rules and hold people accountable even at the local level.
Those are real consequences. It
Yeah.
sends a message that this isn't just empty rhetoric. They're serious about cleaning up the electoral process.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to acknowledge that these efforts, while promising, are still just one part of a much larger solution.
Right, we can't just rely on the Comelec to solve this problem.
No,
It
no.
requires a multifaceted approach that addresses the root causes of vote buying,
Yeah.
like poverty and lack of opportunity.
Exactly. It requires investments in education, economic development, and strengthening democratic institutions to create a society where vote buying is no longer seen as a viable option.
It's about empowering citizens to demand more from their leaders and to hold them accountable for their actions.
Well said. It's a long and complex journey, but I believe that the Philippines is moving in the right direction.
I hope you're right. And it's clear that the upcoming election will be a crucial test of how effective these new measures will be in curbing vote buying. But beyond the immediate outcome, it's really about building a future where Filipinos can have faith in their democracy.
Absolutely. And that's a future worth fighting for.
This has been such an insightful conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, from the specifics of Comelec's strategies to the broader implications for Philippine society.
Yeah, it has been great talking with you about this.
And thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the complex world of Philippine elections. We'll continue to follow this story closely and bring you updates and analysis as they develop. Stay tuned to the Philippines Stories Deep Dive channel for more in-depth explorations of the issues that matter most to Filipinos.